Oh, hang on, I've got to do some. Well, welcome back. It was great to see so many people buzzing around the platform over lunch. This was very much of the vision of the team at RTM to build a community of like-minded rail industry thinkers, actively working with one another way beyond the events themselves. Together, we really can do great things, and it seems as if that is already happening. To start our afternoon session, a panel debate, which will be of particular interest to our rail supply chain, ED&I in procurement. Increasingly, equality, diversity and inclusion efforts have become a cornerstone of our industry. And in order to encourage that to continue, many of our larger bodies and principal contractors have introduced ED&I aspects into contract tenders and awards. If you want to win business, ED&I is a consideration that your organisation must make. So how do one go about that? Well, to help me in these conversations, I'm joined by a mix of industry experts who can offer valuable guidance. I'm delighted to welcome Mark Lomas, Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at HS2 Limited, Kalpini Davé, Head of Procurement and Commercial at the RSSB, and Kate Jennings, Policy Director at the Railway Industry Association. Now, as always, this is your opportunity to put important questions to our guests, so please do take advantage of the live Q&A tools on offer on your screen. So welcome to all of our guests, and thank you for bearing with us on such a hot and sticky day. I don't know about your end, but certainly in my department here in Shepherd's Bush, it's a bit hot. But anyway, let's get on with the debate. And I'd like to start by asking all of you what equality, diversion and inclusion in procurement means to you. And Kate, if you'd like to start us off, that would be wonderful.
Yes, and I just say thank you for the opportunity really to speak to everybody today. So for RIA, the Railway Industry Association, I suppose this is about two things. You know, it's about celebrating the opportunities and growing the next generation of talent in the rail industry, whether that's by attracting people, you know, into the industry and recruiting people, or whether it's supporting them into those sort of leadership roles and the future opportunities. And then also for me, it's about celebrating actually the diversity of the supply chain. So the RIA members include global companies, they include micro SMEs, they work across different sectors and different industries. And I think too often people think of rail as not being very diverse, either in terms of its people or in terms of the talent that it draws from. But I'd like to sort of celebrate the fact that that's not always true, but also to create opportunities and learn and grow where we can. And why, I suppose two reasons again, why it's important. I think it's important, you know, for the people. It's important that rail reflects the communities it serves and it's drawing on the full range of talent amongst those communities. And it's also important for productivity, innovation, creativity. It's important because it's the right thing to do and because it unlocks all of that potential.
Lovely first answer. Thank you, Kate. Kalpini, you're nodding away there. You're responsible for cultivating and implementing procurement strategy at RSSB. I'm guessing you agree with a lot of what Kate said, but give us what it means to you.
I mean, echoing exactly what Kate has said, but also I think it's that we need to create that transparency within the rail industry to show that, yes, this is the aspirations of the industry, and this is what we're doing to meet those aspirations. Not just that, it's also, as Kate had said, about creating that opportunity, that diversity, but then we've got to make sure that we are also, as a responsible organisation, we are implementing those ED&I opportunities. So we've got to make sure that we are creating those within our contracts, within the discussions and negotiations that we have with our suppliers, and not just with our suppliers, but within the organisation as well. So I think that's key, that we've got to make sure that we do that.
Now, you've been talked about in two of our earlier sessions. Lorraine Martins from Network Rail gave you a glowing introduction. And I think she's a bit envious that you've got your HS2 hat on, you know, and wondering what the benefits of an inclusive procurement model are for you. I think what she meant was, you know, Network Rail's, you know, older and it's harder to change, where you have this amazing opportunity at a relatively new company to make a massive difference and start afresh, really.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely right. I'd like to claim it was it was more good timing than anything. I think for us, embedding diversity and inclusion into procurement is about a few things. Number one, we want to work with organizations that share our values, and setting our expectations around EDI is important for that. Opening up the sector to new entrants is also really important. Not to push anyone out, but we've got more and more investment in the sector, and we've got more and more skills gaps. So bringing new entrants in is about the sustainability of the sector. For us, it's about innovation as well. We know SMEs they're great at bringing innovation, and I think finally for HS2, which, like I said, is a new program with massive amounts of public investment, we have the opportunity to and help improve EDI practices across the whole sector. And I think the benefit of it is, if you're working for HS2 on our contracts, you can kind of think of it as getting paid to change. Right? You've got a big contract with HS2. You're getting paid to future-proof your business, and diversity is a way of doing that.
Kalpini, how do we embed EDI in the supply chain?
Oh gosh, so yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean there are a number of initiatives that you can use. Making sure that they do have the correct policies, the correct training plans, and making sure that we cultivate that relationship with the supplier. I think it's difficult if you yourself don't have that in place already. So you've got to show that, yes, this is what we're doing in the organization, and this is how you would like to see the supplier or the SME, how they could do this as well. I think it's more a case of building that collaborative approach with them that will help them and nurture them and show them that, yes, we're on a journey as well, and we're in this together.
What do you think, Kate, it means to the suppliers?
So for the suppliers, I think it, again, it is about their companies and the diversity of talent that they're drawing on. But I always think of SMEs here as well, that you can't always recruit your way into diversity. If you're a micro business, for example, but you can usually do something. Maybe you engage with local schools and celebrate the careers opportunities in rail. Maybe you just share the best practice that you've got within your company. So I think whether you're a global company that has a big strategy and I think of some of our companies in membership like Jacobs or Atkins, who are known for the activity that they do in this space, or Balfour Beatty, who can be real sort of global leaders, or whether you're a smaller company, it can mean something to everyone, I think. And as RIA, we try to support that. We try to share that best practice. And for example, some of the things that we've done, I think you heard from Adeline from Women in Rail earlier today, we as RIA try to be the sort of catalyst to support our suppliers, and things like our EDI charter, can sort of set the tone and, set the expectation really for what people can do on diversity. And we've set up this EDI group. Again, you're hearing from them later today. It's all about, I suppose, just being that catalyst, thinking of positive examples, celebrating success, because I think together we can do more.
I'm just wondering, Mark, I watched your ED&I short film, and you are encouraging businesses of all sizes and shapes to work with you. But does embedding EDI in procurement and contract management requirements mean that sometimes that puts SMEs at a disadvantage?
That's a great question. This is one I get asked quite a lot. I think the quick answer is no. There's lots of stuff you can do as an SME which is not costly. So we require monitoring of the workforce. Well, actually, that can be achieved through some very cheap survey tools. We have requirements around training. And those can be satisfied for free. We have a partnership with the Supply Chain Sustainability School and a joint learning pathway, so that an SME who wants to do their diversity training on a range of topics can do that joint learning pathway, and that's suitable for HS2, TfL, Highways England, and Network Rail. So it doesn't necessarily need to be costly as an SME. You can pick up your phone to the couple of suppliers, your main suppliers, and find out actually you have diversity in your supply chain, etc. So no, it doesn't necessarily need to be a disadvantage. And I think there are some SMEs which have won some very big contracts at HS2. And they've been able to turn around and implement what we need them to do within 8 to 12 weeks with a bunch of free resources. So it doesn't need to be costly. It doesn't need to be time intensive. And there are lots of opportunities out there with plenty of organizations to support you.
Kalpini, what contractual requirements are there to obtain ED&I?
So sort of building on what Mark has said with regards to the monitoring and compliance to make sure that they do address the legislative requirements. So we do ask for information and evidence of that, and we work with suppliers if they don't have that information to hand, and to see, okay, how could they develop a training plan or an ED&I monitoring form. So making sure that they are aware of the need to incorporate this and how it could help them in the future. And also what Kate and Mark have both said about working within the community to make sure that they address how they could do that, whether it be, just working with apprenticeships or work local schools, how they could inform the community about the work that they do and how they could bring the community into the work that they're doing.
Kalpini, how can we measure it?
Oh, this is a difficult one. Yes, you do have your training forms. You have the surveys. It's a case of, okay, how often do you need to measure this? Is that a significant enough tool to use? For me, it's difficult in that all that I have, RSSB is quite new to ED&I, so we're literally on the verge at the moment. So in my past, where I've worked before, yes, it's been a case of you have the monitoring tools to help you. At RSSB, as I said, we're very new to this, and we're just starting to incorporate ED&I. And we had Mark do a wonderful talk to RSSB about how we could further that. But it's monitoring it's difficult. I think with the surveys, we will be putting those out, and we will be reviewing every 6 months to see, okay, has it moved? Has there been a significant impact in ED&I, and how else we can improve? If there's anything else, we've just launched our supply relationship management process with our top tier suppliers. So it's working with them to see what they have as well, and if there's anything there we could build on. So that's the way we're going at the moment.
I'm keeping an eye on these questions that are coming in on the right-hand side. Possibly one I think came off the back of your answer, Kate. It's a question from Shoba. Can you give some examples of EDI best practice and sharing this and implementing it across all levels of the organisation?
So I would give our EDI as an example of best practice. So the EDI charter that was done jointly with RIA and Women in Rail was launched at the RIA conference in November last year, and we've now got over 160 signatories, including small businesses and global companies. And it highlights things like having a board level champion for EDI. And creating space for quiet voices, that sort of thing. So I think signing up to the charter, I would see as an example of best practice. I think then it's really up to individual companies what they want to do. That it's not like there is a one size fits all. But as Mark has said, there's some great free training resources out there. There are events like this where you can share ideas and best practice. And when it comes to I suppose it's worth saying, I think the government and clients like High Speed 2 and Network Rail have done some great stuff recently. So I think for me, things like the government, the changes to the Green Book, which mean that when business cases are being signed off for funding for rail projects, It's not just about the economic case, it is also about social value, because I think previously some of this stuff is quite qualitative, and it was maybe quite hard for the suppliers to feel that they will be recognised for spending money on this. And, you know, obviously it does involve, you know, investment, but I think that change in the Green Book, things like the construction playbook published by the Cabinet Office recently, I mean, people can find that on government websites. The fact that it commits to things like procurement pipelines. I mean, I know that doesn't sound like EDI, but it absolutely is. You know, for RIA members, if you can see what the procurement pipeline is, you've got time to prepare your bids. You've got certainty over the future investment, and that means you can have the confidence to recruit apprentices. You've got the confidence to sort of train your staff and sort of grow your capability. So I think there's like a win-win there in terms of that, you know, just the visibility that government is now committing to show. It just means that individual companies can sort of say, well, I can see, you know, I've heard people say about High Speed 2, you know, you could join as an apprentice today and you could be Mark Thurston, you know, by the time you reach the peak of your career. You know, there are some fantastic opportunities in rail, and if suppliers have the confidence that that work's going to be there, that enables them to sort of start investing in their people and in their skills strategies, which is just fantastic.
Nikki's asking a question I think will be good for you, Mark. Nikki says, as an SME who have expanded in the last year from 15 to 26 people, that's brilliant in the last year, given the situation we put ourselves in the last year. We're finding it really tough getting diverse applicants for new positions. Are there any guidelines to the language we put into job descriptions that could help with this? 2 out of 9 of our developers are women, so we're getting there, but it's hard to employ people who are applying. It's actually a very good, isn't it?
Yeah, very good question. So, yes, you're absolutely right. A lot of organizations start chipping away at the diversity of their talent pool as soon as they start writing the job description. So there are online free tools like gender decoders and other things which you can use, which will take gender biased language out of ads. There are both paid for and non-paid for tools. But I would also encourage you to think about what type of experience you're requiring. You know, is it necessary to have transport or rail experience? Think about the requirements you're setting. Think about where you're not advertising or where you're not your advert. Basically, to be blunt about it, if you only put out the adverts to people you know, it's unlikely that it'll reach the most diverse set of applicants. So think about, you know, those organizations, those job boards which you might be able to use, and how you might be able to use social media effectively as a cheap means of sort of advertising. But yes, there are tools that you can use to check on language and job descriptions. And then also, that's just one stage. You need to have a think about your selection process and how you go through that. But reaching people is sometimes the easier bit of the equation.
Tina's question, are there any quick wins big businesses can do? Who fancies tackling that one? Kalpini?
Yeah,
So
in terms of quick wins, I would say make sure that they do have an EDI policy that they could share with potential customers like ourselves. And I think also the comms is really important. I mean, I know Mark touched on it in terms of the when you're putting out the adverts and things, but I think communications is really important to show that, okay, this is what we do, this is where we've come. Yes, we have the oh gosh, I'm going to completely forget what it is. The salary checker for, you know, I've completely forgotten what the name is called. Anyway, to see the number of women that are paid the same as men. So that is important, but it's to highlight, okay, what else do you do, and what else are you willing to do to make sure that you do follow ED&I practices.
Is implementing ED&I.
For myself, I think it's literally it has to be a change of thinking from the top down, to say that yes, we want to employ a more diverse workforce. We want to ensure that we're providing opportunities to new organisations. We are embracing SMEs and we are following through. So there has to be that acceptance and willingness from senior C-suite directors to say, this is how we want to progress. This is how we want to change the industry. I think the other barriers can be people set in their ways to do things in one way, and so it's getting that buy-in and making sure that from the supplier side as well, the supply chain, they also realize that yes, we need to change, that the environment we live in is changing as well nowadays. So to accept that we need to work together to make sure we bring about that change. Can't hear you, sorry.
Oh, I couldn't hear you there.
Oh, I don't know. Kate, can you hear me?
I can hear
You're back now.
We can hear you now.
What barriers you saw to implementing ED&I in procurement?
That's it. So I don't think, I suppose I would agree with Kalpini that having positive role models, particularly at a senior level, is, you know, because I don't really think that this is that hard. I don't think, you know, in a sense there are barriers because it's the right thing to do and it's the right culture change to happen. You know, I think sometimes it can be difficult and change is never easy, is it? But I think if you do have that, you know, sort of leadership from the top, I know one of the things that we've done is try and identify, you know, role models across the rail supply chain community. And give them profile, you know, find ways of getting them profile at events like this or on LinkedIn or, you know, in real events like in the sort of Rail Week plans. Because I think I know one of the things that people have said to us is that sometimes if you're a new entrant to rail and maybe you're 18 and you look at the people working in rail and they don't look like you, that's not helpful. But I think the more we can talk about diversity, the more you realise that some of those really senior people, you know, they might look like a white man and a typical rail person, but when you talk to them, you realise that, you know, maybe their background was quite simple. You know, maybe their mum was a single parent, and it's about opening up these conversations, because I think that's how you get to this sense of actually this is about celebrating success. This is about social mobility as much as it is about all other aspects of diversity. So I think just, you know, the quick wins are just starting to talk about it and having open, honest conversations, I think. And getting it right.
I think how important, Kate,
I think they're really important, and I think, you know, I think what we're finding is, you know, that it is something that everyone wants to talk about. You know, I think having got the debate going, in a sense, the fact that government is committed to it, that the clients are committed to it, a lot of our suppliers are, you know, have been working on this agenda for some time. It's not easy, in the sense that, you know, I know that it can be difficult to recruit as diverse a talent pool as you want to, but I think the onus is on all of us in the industry to go out there and celebrate how great rail is as a career. I think I'm amazed by the number of people who say, I didn't think about working in rail, and yet, you know, in a really uncertain world, it gives massive opportunities. You know, just the diversity of roles that are available in rail. You know, you can work anywhere in the country. You can be in a customer-facing role on a station. You can be sitting at a computer doing software. You know, there are all, you know, just a range of things that you can do. I think we should all be celebrating that and encouraging people to join us.
I think though personally that enough, because the only, you know, as a mother of two fairly young children, the only reason I know that there are many opportunities, both my son and daughter, in rail is because I host rail events like this, and I don't think I would know that as a sort of, as a member of the public. I think it needs shouting about, because there are, you know, the skills gap itself, you know, as well as newer companies like HS2 get enormous opportunity to sort of shout from the rooftops. There's so many more jobs available now. Mark, your CEO said equality, diversity, inclusion is critical to our success. We need to attract new people to the industry to ensure we have access to the widest possible talent pool. And to do that, we need to draw those skills from all parts of society. It's important that HS2 as a company represents the many and varied communities it will impact. that must be music to your ears, because, you know, following on from what Kalpini and Kate were saying, it's very important, isn't it, that the feeling is there from the top to make sure, you know, from the top down to get this right.
Yeah, I mean, having senior level support is is crucial to success, and of course, diversity, skills, and spending money with SMEs, etc. These are all part of the strategic goals at HS2. Important to be transparent about what your progress is and where you have more work to do. And my advice to companies would, you know, if you're making commitments, you make sure you follow on. Use your data to help you make meaningful change, but rhetoric doesn't match the reality. So you can have the best policy in the world, very little behind it. That's no good. If you're seeking work with HS2, we're looking for the impact and the evidence of the impact of your activities. So there's no point in over promising and under delivering, because people see through that. Step by step, setting out your progress and what needs to change and what to improve is by far the best way forward, I think.
And just before I forget, Mark, Tina says, can you share any links to the job portals you find the best platforms for recruitment? So maybe you could share that perhaps on our platform later. And
yes,
then
I'll be happy to.
Lovely, thank you. Stuart Coates, how do we ensure procurement staff are trained and motivated to manage EDI requirements to deliver positive outcomes over the contract term? Often contract delivery can take priority, meaning EDI plans sit on the shelf and are overlooked.
Yeah. I'll happily pick that up. At HS2, the EDI requirements are part of, so they are contractual requirements. So there's no chance of them sitting on the shelf for months and months and months. And we regularly review the progress with all our suppliers. And Stuart's made a great point. If it's not part of the contractual requirements, you're not monitoring, you're not reporting against it, it's not being looked at. Frankly, what's the point? So it's very important that your ask of the supply chain is clear. They know what they're trying to deliver, and they report against it, and then you support them to improve. And I think I really liked what Kalpini said earlier when she said it's a we thing. HS2, we feel that way. We, us and the supply chain, we succeed or we fail together, particularly around diversity and inclusion. And that's why we will provide tools and databases and digital tools to help the supply chain, all sorts of things. But yes, if you're not monitoring it and you're not actively looking to improve things, then why bother?
Kate, what are you personally doing to promote diversity and inclusion?
So we're doing quite a few things. So I personally, so the EDI charter that I mentioned earlier, that was an initiative that I personally identified for RIA. I took the idea to our board, you know, this time last year, and said I felt like there were lots of things going on an EDI across the sector. But the risk was that there was no place for it all to come together, and that by creating the charter we could pull together the rail family, and not duplicate things that were happening already, but you know, celebrate all the different partners we've got working with us in this space. So there are great networks like Women in Rail, Muslims in Rail, Archway, and you know, the charter for me sort of sits across those and helps to promote the great work that they're all doing. I think the other work that I'm quite passionate.
Kate, but until we get her back, I'll take another question. Graham Shaw says, touching on Helen's comment, how do the panel think we as the rail sector can get the message out there about opportunities in rail in order to better grow the talent pool for the industry? I mean, Kalpini, is that something you can touch on and then have a final from Mark?
Yeah, I mean, we have so we've created a video of RSSB staff to show how diverse they are. And if you get a chance to have a look at that video, please do, because it shows that you have a wide range of people, not just, as you said, the white male in the industry. And it also sort of demonstrates how we are improving ourselves and willing to talk and open up that conversation. So I think it's very important to get that message out there. I think Mark has touched on that before. We need to improve our comms. We need to improve our branding to show that we are actually wanting a more diverse workforce, a more diverse supply chain. If you do get a chance to go on the LinkedIn page for RSSB, have a look at that video, and you will see that we have a huge number, a wide range of diverse employees and workforce. So please do go on that.
We are pretty much at the end, but Kate, you got cut off. Final quick thought from you, and then Mark will take a final quick thought from you, if we may.
Thank you, Helen. So what I was going to say is the next thing we're doing is actually we have a sort of Trailblazers brand, which is all about supporting the rising stars in the industry. And we're going to run some events in partnership with people like NSAR, the National Skills Academy for Rail, the Rail Museum, and others, and their relationships with schools and universities. To support either the talent in the industry already and the schools and the universities that we can recruit from. So if anyone wants to follow up on this call with me directly on any of that, I'm very happy to do that, because I am passionate about making the change we want to see, really supporting that in any way we can.
Well, what an offer. That's fantastic. Mark, quick thoughts, and then we're off to our next speaker.
I mean, I would just say, I would encourage all organizations to have a look at what the opportunities that are out there. Unconsciously, we all do similarity very, very, very well. If you want to do D&I well and you're at the start of your journey, make sure you have conscious consideration and a good but realistic plan that sits behind it in a day.
You certainly can't change the world in a day. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you to Mark, Kalpini and Kate for joining us this afternoon. I hope you agree that was really insightful, and I'm sure it's going to be hugely beneficial to you, our audience. Right now, I'd like to hand over to Rebecca Richardson, Accessibility Manager at Greater Anglia, to hear about the work Rebecca and her colleagues have been doing to improve their network and services in terms of making them inclusive for all. So, Rebecca, I'll let you get onto the virtual stage.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you for the opportunity to come along and speak today about accessibility and disability equality, and share some of my thoughts and experiences of working in this field in rail. I particularly wanted to talk to you today about how I think collaboration can improve the equality in the customer experience. So I've been working in the role of Accessibility Manager at Greater Anglia for just over 3.5 years. And I can honestly say that the job I do today is completely different to the one it was 3.5 years ago. In the past, the role of Accessibility Manager was largely a compliance role. And I think it'd be fair to say that the industry had a bit of a, how can I make sure we don't get into trouble with the regulator kind of attitude to accessibility. Fast forward 3.5 years and it's completely different. The attitude now is much more, how can we improve and add value to the customer experience of disabled customers, obviously whilst not getting into trouble with the regulator. Now, obviously I'd like to take credit for all of this, but it would be completely disingenuous for me to do that. It's been a real collaborative shift in attitude on behalf of the entire industry, really. Within the Access and Inclusion team, and I do consider myself to be part of a team that's bigger than Greater Anglia, I work really closely with my colleagues across the industry. Within that team, there is a passion and mindset that we have an important role to play in creating a better service for our customers, and that we need to do that together. And that's what I want to talk about today. So this morning we heard some great discussions about how to recruit a diverse workforce. And I imagine the same conversation is taking place across lots of different industries as we speak. But I wonder how many of those businesses, organisations and recruiters give any thought to how their colleagues actually get to those jobs? Now, as transport providers, we have a unique and important role in supporting the diversity of other businesses. By creating an inclusive transport system for our customers and embedding access and inclusion into our recruitment, into our decision-making, and into our working practices, we're facilitating equality of opportunity, not just for our own colleagues, but for other industries too. We saw during lockdown how our vital services, the economy, society even, depends on public transport providers to support the workforce of this country. Rail workers were designated key workers and supported other key workers. So important is our role in the fabric of this country. We also know that during normal times, the railway provides a lifeline for so many people. They link families and communities and reduce social isolation. They're vital for people who don't or can't drive. Getting to the hospital, going shopping, getting to work. It's also a green option. And yet for so many people, rail travel just isn't an option because it's not accessible. So let's have a look at what we mean by accessible. So on this slide here, you'll see there's a typical picture of how we probably would define accessibility, i.e. something that we need to do or provide to help a wheelchair user access our trains and platforms. Step-free access. Now, however, access and inclusion managers across the industry are advocating the social model of disability, and we are looking more closely at the barriers people face when they travel and what we need to do as an industry to remove them and to create equity for all of our customers. So on the next slide, we can see what some of those might be. It might be around our information provision. Are we using jargon? Are we using plain English? Or maybe our timetabling. Do we allow enough people to board and unboard? Is it in our operational methods maybe, or our rail replacement policies, our procurement services, or our service level agreements around toilets and lift repair, for instance? All of these things directly or indirectly affect the customer experience, but in some cases, they actually create fundamental barriers for people when trying to travel and access rail. Now, as an industry, we think we've got a pretty good understanding of what our customers need. You know, we've got lots of rules and regulations and standards to guide us to make the right decisions, particularly actually with regards to accessibility and disabled customers. But how often do we actually test what we think we know about accessibility with our customers? Well, at Greater Anglia, we have done some of that in recent years. On the next slide, you'll see some images that we took when we did a sort of first of its kind customer consultation process on the design of our new Swiss-built trains. Now, I'm sure all the other A&I leads around the country are taking a giant yawn at the moment because they're probably bored to death of me talking about this, but they're going to just have to mute me for a minute because I think what we learned from this is so valuable. During the design process for our new trains, we engaged a group of disabled customers and stakeholders, and twice we took a contingent to Switzerland to meet the manufacturers, to make recommendations on the design features of the new trains. And I honestly don't think any of us had been fully prepared for how transformative that was going to be and the value of doing so. We learned so much from that collaborative exercise. We learned about customer behaviour. We learned about regulatory standards and how, you know, they're not minimum standards. They are minimum standards, not aspirations. And we learned how regulatory standards don't always meet customer expectations or needs. We also learned, very importantly, that it is possible to get engineers out into the daylight and to be thinking of the customer experience. So Actively listening to our customers was so valuable. If we hadn't done this, for instance, we wouldn't have known that the colour scheme that we were proposing, whilst fully compliant with all the regulatory standards, actually offered poor colour contrast in certain lighting conditions, or that our call for aid buttons, again, fully compliant with the regulatory standards, actually could be positioned in more practical places. So this insight allowed us to modify the design of the train in line with the customer needs and to make it more inclusive. Now, if we go to the next slide, of course, this happened pre-pandemic, but I think one of the biggest opportunities COVID has given us is the chance to rethink who our customers are and how we engage with them. We've seen a massive drop in customer numbers, and this has been even more significant in our disabled customer groups. And the return to rail continues to rise in smaller numbers for disabled people. There's still a great deal of anxiety about what rail travel is going to look like, particularly for customers who may have been shielding, for instance. And yet we know that disabled and older customers rely more heavily on public transport options than non-disabled adults. We also know that COVID has changed the working patterns of lots of people. So the 57% of customers who were commuting or travelling for business before the pandemic, the bread and butter of the industry as it were, isn't guaranteed anymore. So we really need to ensure that when people are making their choices about how they will travel in the future, rail is seen as an attractive, accessible option, and we're not limiting our chances of growing our customer base or, in fact, our workforce. So another collaboration project that I've been working on at Greater Anglia is with our neighbouring operator, C2C. And this is to create a regional accessibility panel to tackle some of the issues that disabled customers face when they're travelling. So we have recruited a number of disabled customers to assist us and to basically use that social model theory to look at our businesses and to tackle some of those barriers which disproportionately disadvantage older and disabled people. So Alex Wybrow at C2C and I both really believe that this panel and this collaborative approach that we've got going on in the region is the key to more inclusive mindsets in our business. We're refining our equality and diversity impact assessment processes, and once we've embedded those, we want to use the panel as a step in the sign-off process for projects which impact customers, and giving us greater sort of scrutiny and challenging us in our projects and in our working practices. We've also put a lot of work into our colleague training programs in the last couple of years. Again, working collaboratively with disabled people to create and deliver thought-provoking, interesting, current training courses for our people. Using disabled people to design and deliver the content has given us two really powerful tools to break down some of these barriers. And they are empathy and knowledge. Customers and colleagues alike benefit when we get to hear from people with lived experience of disability. We can feel more confident when we know the correct language to use, for instance, and learn how to support one another in a dignified way, both in the office and on the platform. And customers can relax knowing that their needs are going to be met with the least fuss and drama, which is what all customers want. But like most of the industry, we've had to shift our training online during COVID, and this has meant we had to be a little bit more creative with our methods to keep it engaging. And so during the second lockdown, we delivered 6 webinars, again in collaboration with a host of well-known disabled people, from academics, influencers, business leaders, and we discussed lots of topics relating to accessibility of rail. And again, we learned so much from this process. We learned how empowering it was when we created opportunities for independent travel, and how valuable good quality information is. How simple things like a warm personal greeting can make all the difference in someone's journey. But interestingly, no one mentioned lifts and bridges, which is probably what you would expect in a conversation about accessibility. But importantly, everything discussed is in our power to change and to create a more inclusive environment, get customers travelling with us again. And I think hearing those voices also gave us real food for thought in how we support disabled colleagues or colleagues who are carers, for instance. So accessibility is now really high on the agenda of the entire industry and all the operators. And it's led by a very passionate group of people. None of us are under any illusion that we've got this nailed. But where we do get something right, we are willing to share, we work collaboratively to create best practice. However, I'm sure they'd all agree with me that passion only gets you so far. Change is what's needed, but it doesn't happen overnight, and changing culture can be a really big uphill battle. So embedding equality into our process is the key. Now, there are several things that I think we need to do to keep moving in the right direction. And I think we've all got a part to play in this. But if I was asked to summarise 3 things that I think would be the basis for change, it would be this. If we can move to the next slide. Representation. In our workforce, disability, probably more than any other protected characteristic, is really poorly represented, despite 20% of the population identifying as disabled, which means that it's often not at the forefront of our minds. And on the next slide, number 2 is, thank you, representation again. Disabled customers are not a homogenous group. They're commuters, they're leisure travellers, they're parents, grandparents, teenagers, professionals, and they've got to be represented in the mainstream, not as a separate group. This includes in our customer panels, for instance, or stakeholder engagement, in our communications with customers, and in our consultations. And lastly, on the final slide, again, it's representation. The phrase, nothing about us without us, should apply to any conversation we're having about older and disabled customers, and in fact, the wider discussions in equality, diversity and inclusion. Unless older and disabled people are included in those conversations, and in that I also mean include staff training, then I don't think we're adequately representing the needs of older and disabled people. Thank you.
That was absolutely fantastic, Rebecca, and wonderful to hear what you're doing about accessibility at Greater Anglia. Thank you so much for your time. It was really informing and insightful. So let's take our final short networking break of today. This is another chance to jump into our speed networking function and engage with fellow delegates, work together to build connections and potentially solve one another's problems through a fresh set of eyes. It's also a great opportunity to keep exploring the platform and earning points on the gamification leaderboard. You never know. You have to be in it to win it. I can't remember who said that, but somebody famous did. And you could be one of our 3 winners come the end of the day. I'll see everyone back for our next speaker, Nadine Ray, at 2:55. That's back here at 5 to 3. Thank you. 7-minute break. Good speaker.